Marin Solon woke to the sound of tiny roars beside her pillow. Not the roars of earth lions, though the comparison would have been apt 6 months ago. These were higher-pitched, squeakier, with an underlying rumble that suggested the creatures making them would one day shake mountains. Right now, though, they could barely shake her bedsheets. She cracked one eye open. 3 pairs of golden eyes stared back at her, each set belonging to a fuzzy, tiger-striped cub no larger than a terrier. Their ears twitched in unison, triangular and alert. The smallest one, Kib, she'd named him, sat at attention closest to her face, his tail wrapped neatly around his haunches, like he'd been practicing military protocol. Really? Marin groaned, pulling the thermal blanket over her head. It's 0600 hours. Don't you cubs sleep? Another tiny roar. This one had more bass to it, more insistence. A paw batted at the blanket, claws carefully retracted. The Kithari cubs had learned quickly that human skin was absurdly fragile compared to their armored hides. Marin sighed and sat up, her back protesting the motion. Sleeping on a cargo ship's converted storage bay wasn't ideal, but it beat the alternative being dead on Kithar Prime after the Zelthic Concordate's invasion fleet had glassed half the planet. Kib immediately stood on his hind legs, front paws planted on her knee, and let out what could only be described as an official-sounding series of chirps, growls, and mews. His siblings Tosca and Noram watched with solemn expressions, occasionally nodding their oversized heads in agreement. "You're giving me a report," Marin said slowly, recognition dawning. "A morning briefing." Kib's ears perked up. He chirped once, sharply, then continued his vocalization with renewed vigor, occasionally gesturing with one paw toward different parts of the room, toward the ventilation shaft, the storage containers, the door. Marin had spent 3 months embedded with the Kithari military before the invasion. She'd been part of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, sent to build bridges with one of humanity's newest allies, a species of massive, sapient felines whose society revolved around honor, territory, and an intricate system of military hierarchy that made Earth's armed forces look casual by comparison. The adults stood 8 feet tall, weighed half a ton, and could tear through starship bulkheads with their bare claws. They were terrifying, noble, and utterly devoted to their young, which made the genocide attempt even more unforgivable. Marin reached out and gently scratched behind Kib's ears. He paused mid-report, eyes closing briefly in pleasure, before shaking his head and resuming his briefing with even more determination. Okay, she said, forcing herself to focus. "Let me see if I'm getting this right. You checked the ventilation." Kib chirped affirmatively. "You monitored the door for intruders during the night." Another chirp, and Tosca threw up in storage container 7 again. Tosca, the only female of the trio, looked mortally offended. She hissed, but Kib cut her off with a sharp yip that clearly meant, "Don't interrupt the briefing." Marin couldn't help but smile. In the chaos of the evacuation, the screaming, the fire, the desperate sprint through collapsing underground bunkers, she'd found these 3 huddled in a military nursery, their parents likely dead in the initial bombardment. She'd grabbed them without thinking, tucking them into her pack as plasma fire melted the walls around her. The Terran evacuation ship had initially refused to take them. "Humans only," the captain had said, face grim. "We don't have the resources." Marin had pulled her sidearm and aimed it at the deck. "Then I'm not human today." "Let us through." They'd let her through. Now, marooned on this civilian cargo hauler with 200 other refugees, mostly human, a handful of Kithari survivors, and a few opportunistic traders, these cubs were the closest thing to hope anyone had left. Kib finished his report with a final, emphatic roar that surely sounded more impressive in his head than it did in reality. Marin saluted him, 3 fingers to her temple in the Kithari fashion. "Report received and acknowledged, Cadet Kib. Excellent work. You and your squad are dismissed for morning rations." The cub's demeanor changed instantly. Tails shot up, ears forward, and they bounded toward the small heating unit where Marin had warmed their protein supplements. The military discipline vanished as they tumbled over each other, play fighting for position. They were still children, they still played. Despite everything, they hadn't lost that. Marin stood, joints popping, and began her own morning routine. Water from the recycler lukewarm and tasting faintly of metal. Ration bar, allegedly chicken-flavored. The news feed from the communal display mounted on the wall. The war wasn't going well. The Zelthic Concordat had superior numbers, superior firepower, and a willingness to deploy weapons that violated every interstellar convention ever written. Kethar Prime was lost. 3 other Kithari colony worlds had gone silent. The Terran Alliance and its allies were regrouping. But regrouping took time. Time the Kithari didn't have. A soft knock at her door. Marin glanced at the cubs. They were already alert, Kib in front of his siblings. Teeth bared despite his complete lack of intimidation factor. "Easy," she murmured. "It's probably just Hendrix with the supply manifest." She opened the door to find not Hendrix, but Commander Rykar, one of the adult Kithari survivors. He stood hunched in the corridor, too tall for human-designed ships. His fur patched and burned from combat, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. "Ambassador Solon," he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "I heard reports that you have cubs, that you teach them the old ways." Marin stepped aside. Kib immediately launched into another briefing, this time directed at Rykar, complete with gestures and earnest squeaks. For the first time since the evacuation, Marin saw the massive warrior's expression soften. His ears folded back, not in aggression, but in something like wonder. "He gives you morning reports," Rykar whispered. "You taught him this." "I didn't teach him anything," Marin said quietly. He remembered. They all remember. Rykar knelt a position of deep respect among his people and listened as Kib completed his briefing. When the cub finished, Rykar saluted him properly, fist to chest. "Your parents would be proud, young warrior." He looked up at Marin, and his eyes gleamed with something humanity had learned to recognize across a dozen species. Gratitude. And they would be grateful that a human kept the old ways alive when we could not. Marin shook her head. "I'm just keeping them fed and safe." "No." Rykar stood, his full height imposing even in the cramped space. "You are keeping us alive, our culture, our future." He gestured to the cubs, now wrestling over a piece of protein bar. "They will rebuild our worlds. And they will remember that when our people fell, humanity caught us." After Rykar left, Marin sat on her bunk and watched the cubs play. Kib broke away from the game and padded over, climbing into her lap despite being nearly too large for it. He headbutted her chin gently, purring a sound like a small engine. Tomorrow, they'd reach the Terran Sanctuary Station. Tomorrow, the real work of rebuilding would begin. Tomorrow, she'd have to explain to a dozen bureaucrats why she'd stolen military assets, as if children could be assets. But tonight, she had 3 cubs who gave her morning reports, who remembered their heritage, who refused to let genocide erase their culture. "Good work today, cadet," she whispered, scratching behind Kib's ears. "Same time tomorrow?" He chirped once, firmly, then closed his eyes. In the cold darkness of space, aboard a refugee ship fleeing a dying world, a human and 3 cubs slept peacefully. And in the morning, there would be another report. There would always be another morning.